Hello, everyone. It's November 8th, 2022, and welcome to our very special 7 Investing live stream event. Today's event is called Checking In on Twilio. This is a company that's been a popular stock in years past, but it's going through some challenges right now. We're going to be taking an objective look as investors at Twilio here today. I'm 7 Investing CEO Simon Erickson. I'm joined by my fellow 7 Investing lead advisors, Luke Hallard and Anirban Mohanty. We're going to be drilling into Twilio in just a minute. I'm very excited about this conversation. By the way, we're not going to be holding any of the punches. We're going to be going into both the good and the bad things about the company. But before we start with that, if you're unfamiliar with 7 Investing, we are here to empower you to invest in your future. We are believers that the stock market is the greatest compounder of long-term wealth, and it's also a long-term journey. And so we provide our 7 top stock market ideas each and every month, and then ongoing coverage for each of our recommendations. So if you want to check out 7 Investing, visit us at 7investing.com/subscribe. You can get started with just $1 to get an exclusive sneak peek at what everything that our platform has to offer. We're very excited to empower others to invest in their future. Luke and Anirban, I'm pretty excited to jump into Twilio right now. This is a stock that's down almost 90% year to date in 2022. But we also see a CEO that has a turnaround plan and a lot of other good things too. But we all agreed this was not a call that was going to be promotional or marketing or rah-rah cheerleading. We're going to take a real comprehensive and objective look at Twilio. Kind of excited to dig into this even further. And so just doing kind of some agenda of the live stream here today. This is meant to be an interactive event. At any time, you can actually put questions into the chat that you should hopefully see on the right-hand side of the live stream there. We'll take every one of the questions that is asked. And if you'd like to speak live, let us know that as well. But I think that I'll hand it to Anirban first, who has really dug into Twilio, the business. He's going to chat a little about their most recent earnings and some of the insights that he has from that. And then I'd like to hand it to Luke as well, because Luke has been a shareholder of Twilio for several years and has really been digging in as well. We'll all have different perspectives on this call. We encourage it to be interactive, and please post with your thoughts as well. Anirban, let's check in on Twilio. The floor is yours, my friend. How does the company look? I know that you've been looking at it closely here recently.
All right. So in terms of their last quarter, the Q3 2022 earnings, the earnings were actually not bad. Revenue grew something like 30%. It's about $1 billion run rate on a revenue basis, $500 million run rate on a gross profit basis. That's a lot of money coming in through the door. It's just not turning that into profits. And that's because it has been aggressively investing for growth. And I think this model of where you invest everything that you have and more for growth works as long as your top line is growing at a pretty solid pace. That's what I think the problem is this quarter, or they basically indicated that for Q4, the growth is going to slow down. And they basically are indicating somewhere, like the high teens to, maybe early 20% sort of growth is what they're going to get. And they cite macro as the reason. So a couple of things here. They're a usage-based platform largely, which means as the usage goes up, they make more money. As the usage goes down, they make less money. If the usage is going down, that means to increase revenue, they need to bring in more new clients, which becomes harder. And we have to realize it's a pretty large base, right? Which brings us to this really interesting question of, well, if you're a $2 billion gross profit run rate and you still don't make profits, then you've got a problem. I think, in my opinion, then they've, of course, announced that they're going to make some cuts to their workforce. About 11% of their workforce was let go in September, or was announced. So that's going to save, on some operating costs. They're looking to further fine-tune their go-to-market model. That should, again, fine-tune their costs. They're trying to streamline their communications platform go-to-market, which is largely, so introduce a lot more self-service into the scheme of things that should, again, help them. So I think all those things are good. I think a couple of things the market, I think, in my opinion, didn't like. One was pulling back the long-term guidance. So they've always guided to a 30% sort of growth year over year over the medium term. They pulled that. Now they're saying something between 15 and 25%. If you call it 20% in the 20% is what you'd expect a mature software company to do. So that's something like that's what we expect of Salesforce, that we expect of ServiceNow, right? But those companies generate operating profits and free cash flow. So these guys are not there and are saying that we're going to get to that sort of more mature state. That's number one. Then I think there's a bit of a disconnect here in terms of what they talk about, how they're controlling the stock-based comp. I think one of the things that management maybe they realize, maybe they don't realize, is they talk about stock-based comp as a percentage of revenue, saying that going to 15% or 20% of revenue might appear small, but that's the problem is that if your market cap has been completely destroyed, then that 20% or 15% of revenue as stock-based comp is actually pretty large. And the current plan basically suggests there's going to be heavy dilution. So they need to really rethink that and rethink the comp plan. Now I realize that people, that you issue stock, but you don't issue all the stock at one go. Maybe there are vesting periods, they vest over a period of time. Maybe people leave before they vest. So, the dilution is not, 10% is sort of the max dilution that you get at the current market cap at a 20% SBC. Maybe all of that is not realized, but still, it's just too large, too high. So that's the downside. That's those are the bad news items that cause the stock, I think, to fall. The good news here, though, would be that the communications platform is extremely strong. The underlying, a lot of the issues, a lot of the doubts have been around their declining gross margins, and we can double click into this. Their gross margins have been going down largely because of the messaging business, and I think that's a computation issue or how you compute them, because basically the fees have gone up for the messaging components. These are determination fees that the carriers charge, and Twilio is basically just passing through that cost. So basically, it's adding. From its revenue line, it's basically seeing the fees as revenue, but then it's not charging a margin on it. It's just passing it through, which means as the fees goes up, the margin goes down. So, I think it's neither here nor there. That business is actually, in a way, they've got a problem of a really strong international messaging business, which has even lower margin if you think about the fees. But on a per message basis, they're actually making more money. They've actually been able to pass on some price increases there. So that business is really strong. Again, I think the underlying business, the messaging business is strong. They have a budding software business, which accounts for about 70% in the gross profit terms, or 11% in revenue terms. The software business that would have higher margins, that's really strong. Flex is at $100 million run rate in 4 years. That's really strong. So the business is actually strong. The question really is now the go-to-market strategy and the OpEx of the business and so the perception. So that's, I think the final thing I'll say before I hand it over to Luke is there's a company on about $8 billion market cap with about $4 billion cash. So, even if they were to burn somebody, they've got a lot of runway. If they get to break even, they've got a lot of optionality with the cash right now, as long as they make some sensible decisions. And with that, I'll stop.
Well, Luke, I want to hear your thoughts on this as well, but I do want to double click on a couple of things that Anirban said there, which are important. For anyone that has followed Twilio, this has become a communications platform as a service. As Anirban mentioned, it's usage based, and it got its start by sending out text messages, right? If you wanted to use Twilio to send out messages, either a promotion for a Black Friday sale or a holiday sale or something, or a limited time promotion or whatever it might be, you can have users opt in and then get a text message on their phone that they click and then go through the site and then they place orders. And it kind of has expanded over time to include not just messaging, but video and email and social media and all these other things. And those were a lot of those acquisitions that Anirban mentioned too, that had stock-based compensation that was attached to them. And Anirban, like you mentioned, there's kind of some complexities with those acquisitions. They have issued a lot of stock for one, and that might be something that's holding them up right now. But then, like he said, the core business itself, and Anirban, I want to ask you again about that gross margin of the core business. That's lower than other software companies, but that's probably because they're paying the carriers for each one of those texts or each one of those messages that they send. Do you think that Twilio's gross margins that have declined this year. Is that a concern for investors, or is that just more of a cycle of the economy or related to the business model itself?
No, so I think it's related to the business model. I'm not concerned about the gross margin. That's a head fake. That's not a problem. I think what I would be concerned about, though, is the growth of gross profit. So I think that's because let's say the margin, we don't care about the margin. What we really should care about then is how quickly the gross profits dollars are growing. That has actually been on a steady decline. And if I am reading their commentary correctly, what they're basically saying is that our top line growth is going to slow even further next quarter. If that, it really matters as to what the mix is, right? If the top line growth is slowing because they're not selling enough software or higher margin products, then it basically means that the top line is being compensated by the lower margin communications or the messaging business, which means the gross profit dollars are actually going to become even lower in terms of growth rate, right? But if the mix changes such that the lower margin product is selling less and the higher margin product, which is a smaller proportion, is selling more, that actually on a year-over-year gross profit dollars will grow. But the gross profit dollars growth has been on a decline, steady decline for last few quarters, and hit just 25% year over year. So I think that's a concern because that tells us how quickly the underlying business is growing. The overall margin, I think, is a head fake. That's I think level one thinking. That actually does not matter, in my opinion. What matters is the gross profit dollars and the OPEX of the business.
And one last question here for you before we hear Luke's perspective too. But I think this is a good question from Giants25 of, will they reaccelerate revenue? Good point. They've got the land and expand. Maybe they're having a problem with the expand part of that equation, but when will they reaccelerate revenue, if ever?
Okay, so I've got an answer to this, and I'll reference another company. So revenue growth rates for a company like Google has slowed down as well, or Alphabet has slowed down, right? So I think economically sensitive companies, not every company is exposed to the economy to a different extent, right? The thing is that companies that are usage based tend to very quickly reflect macroeconomic headwinds. And they also tend to reflect very quickly macroeconomic tailwinds, right? So remember, this company was growing at a really crazy pace during COVID because there was high usage demand, right? So in a way, it's lapping that. Now there is downturn in certain industries, including crypto and whatnot, right? So those are impacting its growth. But again, eventually, it's going to have an easier compare next year. At some point, it's going to be the beneficiary of the tailwind much quicker than some of the other companies. So, I think, again, I think you can see a very quick turnaround here happen as well. When, I don't know. That's, but I would think that this company should be able to do the 25-30% growth rate for a pretty long time, as long as it has got its go-to-market strategy figured out. I think they've had a lot of problems with their go-to-market strategy. They've had George, who was leading the ship, resign and leave. He left for I don't know what else to do. He left at an opportune time. The reins were handed over to his deputy. That person didn't last that long. Now, then they've got a new person in who's from the board again. So as you have that churn, that sales organization has undergone a lot of churn. There's another thing that has happened as well, as which you said, a lot of the acquisitions, right? With the acquisitions came salespeople. When you are a salesperson at a smaller organization, and now all of a sudden, you might be selling into niche areas. Now all of a sudden you're told not only have to sell, say, Segment or SendGrid, but you have to sell everything else. Well, it becomes a difficult task, and it becomes a difficult thing. And it's very easy to lose your good salespeople when your stock price is going down. So those people leave, creating a void, which creates then a pipeline issue and so on. This thing takes time to build. But again, when the momentum is there in the business, those things will happen, right? Again, as I said, the software business is really strong, and the messaging business actually is really strong. And they've got 2,000. They've got 50% of global 2,000 as customers already, They have some very large clients. If you look at their, $1 million, $5 million, and $10 million annual recurring revenue or annual contract value clients, those have been growing really quickly. So this company has its foot, across the door for some big clients. It's a question of executing on the vision and having that go-to-market strategy, right? So I think it can go back to growth. But, right now, the issue really is execution, and we can fault essentially Jeff Lawson and company for the poor execution to date, right? So the question is, can he turn around the ship? That will be the question.
And I wonder if that's an interesting point for me to jump in as well, because I've been a shareholder for a couple of years, and I'm kind of kicking myself a little bit. I feel like I've been a bit asleep at the wheel. I haven't really monitored this one in my own portfolio. Jeff is, by all accounts, an incredible technology-first leader. I actually interviewed a chap who's worked with him about a year and a half ago on my previous podcast, and he was raving about how close to the kind of cutting edge Jeff Lawson is and really understands technology. But you can have a great technology, but if you don't have the right business skills, you can't translate that into earnings and profit. And I think that's what's gone wrong. And Anirban, you talk about the potential for turnaround. Like, let's contextualize this. So this is an incredibly important operational technology for Twilio's customers. This isn't like something behind the scenes that, like a Slack or a monitoring tool where you could go, okay, guys, it's not working out. We're going to swap it out for something else. We're going to take a little bit of pain. This is like if I'm Uber and, this is a core operational part of my business and I'm sending maybe like hundreds of millions of messages every day using Twilio. So, but like, there's no way Twilio are going to start hemorrhaging customers, really. And it's a very cost-effective solution. So, I don't doubt for a minute that it's a strong, robust business that will continue to grow, continue to acquire new customers. And with its, it's got a good DBNR, albeit the DBNR's coming down a little bit, the dollar-based net revenue retention, but it's still like north of 120%. So
define what that means.
Going to grow.
What is DBNR? What does it mean? Dollar-based net revenue retention? What does that term mean?
Yeah, so for every dollar the company earns from its customers this year, on average, with say 120% DBNR, it'll earn $1.20 next year. That'll compound, kind of getting more wallet share from your existing customers. And that's a great, reliable, kind of money in the bank way to grow, particularly if you have, an operationally critical product like Twilio's is. So kind of, I'm setting out a bit of context what I'm going to say, because, really important technology. It's not going away, but you've got this great technologist and he hasn't demonstrated that he can run a great business and generate, returns for shareholders. And I'm kind of sympathetic, right? Because many, many businesses were caught wrong-footed by kind of coming out of the pandemic and all of the problems that, inflation and all the other issues we've had this year. But Twilio, they're up there with the worst of them, really, in terms of kind of how they're suffering. I like the steps that they talked about in the earnings call a few days ago, where I think they've done, keep me honest, Ben, I think they've exited 11% of their team. And now they're doing a lot of kind of consolidation around costs and trying to be a bit more sensible. But actually, if you really sort of weed through the narrative, it's just too slow, I think, to be honest. So as they go into 2023, they're going to start turning up the dial, start moving towards non-GAAP, very important non-GAAP kind of operational profitability. I think I saw a comment in the earnings call that free cash flow is 3 to 5 years away. I mean, that's kind of unforgivable in the current market. I know they've got a long way to go to get to generating free cash flow, but the market is not going to look kindly on them for that for the next year or so. And so as I look at this in my own portfolio, I think there are other companies that have suffered, equal or even bigger drawdowns over the last year. I think those other companies might be more poised to make a faster comeback just because of this, rather slow kind of turning of the ship that Twilio have planned. I think the business is good. I don't, unfortunately, think the leadership team are good. They don't seem to have a CFO, from what I can tell. They've got a chap who's the COO. He seems to have a very broad range of responsibilities I definitely see that if the valuation stays where it is or turns south, there could be under a lot of pressure, perhaps from activist investors, and maybe ultimately an acquisition. And perhaps that's the best outcome for shareholders today.
Yeah, can I
Absolutely.
have a quick
Go ahead. Yeah.
just a quick rejoinder on that. So, I think I would not say that they've been that bad in execution in a way. I mean, the reason I would say, so they made mistakes, but I think one of the things that is happening here is that we're looking at it from a shareholder returns perspective, right? So you're looking at the shareholder returns being decimated and saying that, well, they did a poor job, right? But to counterpoint that, for example, they made acquisitions, but they did not raise capital, or they did not, issue debt, convertible notes, and things like that. They actually used their overpriced stock to make those acquisitions in a way. So that was good, right? So that was pretty smart. So they acquired both SendGrid and Segment using basically their stock. Right. So I think that's good. So Chip Chandler, who is the CEO, he was the CFO, or I think he was the CFO, and then he's got this dual role. I mean, his role seems to be CFO-ish, and because he's basically dealing with all the numbers and reporting all the numbers equivalent. So I think, in my mind, I think the issue they've got is, and I think if they get to non-GAAP operating profit, they should get pretty close to free cash flow as well, right? I think, if basically non-GAAP operating profit would mean that they're basically issuing, they're adding back the stock if they stock-based comp, and that's basically allowing them to generate operating profits by the end of 2023. Then I would think that they would be getting pretty close to free cash flow. Again, free cash flow will also be a non-GAAP number, right? Because they're going to add back the SBC. Yeah. The issue, though, I think, is that if they're calculating, in my mind, and I think this is the reason that the stock is down, if they are thinking they're going to add back 20% stock to get to free cash flow, they can get to free cash flow, but the stock would be dead. I think in my mind, that's the problem that they've got. There's some simple solutions to that. If they make me CFO for this company, I can solve this. I'll just basically do a $2 billion buyback, right? Or issue a $3 billion buyback, because I could then buy back not only the shares I issue, but I could buy back some more shares in the market, and I can very quickly get to free cash flow positive. At which time, hopefully, my valuation has reverted as well. It is very hard.
There was an interesting comment on that in the earnings call, because Chip Chandler he was challenged on doing a buyback by one of the analysts towards the end of the call, and he said he's open to that. But I think Jeff chimed in on the same point and also said, they love having this kind of cash hoard, and they're also thinking about acquisitions in the space of AI. So, there might be more spend still. And if he's talking about using the cash, because he can't use his stock anymore, right? Because it's, been devalued so heavily. There's a can of worms that I'll go into a bit later about AI.
Yeah. So I think, I would be surprised if they get an opportunity to do an acquisition right now. If they do an acquisition, their shares are going to be cut in half again. So I think as a management team, at this point, see, here's the thing. I think they made the deck and the presentation for the analyst day and the Q3 culture together, and they came up with this deck before the shares actually fell 40%, right? So
the world moves fast.
The world moves with them, and I think an acquisition is completely out. If you have to be dumb and dumber to actually make an acquisition. Right now, they have got some capital allocation decisions to make. I wouldn't be surprised, really, if they don't come back and say we're going to do an SBC, a stock buyback. If they don't do that, as you said, as Simon was saying, some activity is going to come on board, raise a lot of noise, or some PE is going to lob them an offer at $10 billion, which will be very difficult for them to at that point. Somebody lobs an offer at 30% more than the current price. It's going to be very difficult for the board to turn that down. Like the independent board members will not be able to turn it down, right? Jeff Lawson might not like it, but he's going to be one person among the many. in the board to turn it down. So I think they're in a really sticky position, and they really need to figure out the capital allocation. But yeah, that's what I think. I'll stop.
At the end of this call, I'm going to ask myself, Luke, and Anirban all to rank Twilio on a scale of 1 to 10 of how bullish they are about the company. 10 is you are going out and buying Twilio right after this call is over. 10 is you are selling your shares and burning them on fire on the way out. But, I'd like everyone in the audience to chime in too in the chat on 1 to 10. How bullish are you? 1 is completely bearish, 10 is completely bullish on Twilio today. I do have some thoughts that I wanted to add to this. This is an incredible discussion. Some great points that are being raised here. I wanted to comment about the acquisitions and the change in the go-to-market approach. Because when Twilio was founded by Jeff Lawson, and a couple other co-founders, this was a business that was sold to developers. This was not going to CIOs and management decision makers or administrators. It was for the developers that said, hey, we can build something on top of this. This communications as a platform service is really pretty awesome. And it's also pretty cheap. The core SMS messaging costs a fraction of a penny, 0.0079 cents per text message you send out. And so if you do the math on that, if you send this out to 10,000 people that have opted in to receive your offer, that costs you $79. You're probably going to get a pretty good return on that. And my perspective is that Twilio in that core platform, that core messaging, perhaps even email, this kind of core platform that they have, they can still raise prices quite a bit, maybe 50% even, and still get a good ROI for their customers. The other point that was made was the acquisitions. Specifically, when we're talking about acquisitions, we're talking about 3 transactions. Twilio acquired SendGrid for email API platform for $2 billion on all stock in 2019. That's a lot of money. It also then acquired Segment, which was customer data platform, wanted to break down these walls or these silos of data so that the customers that were using them could see a lot more comprehensive view of who they were sending the offers to. And they paid $3.2 billion for that in 2020, also all stock. And then they acquired ZipWhip, which was for toll-free, 1-800 kind of numbers, free messaging, for $839 million in 2021. And I think this is an interesting dynamic right now because, as we've mentioned, this is land and expand, right? Get in with messaging, then start doing email, then you start expanding into social, then you start doing all these other things, video, whatever else it is. But Twilio paid kind of premium price for those acquisitions. And now, even though it's making progress, most of them are growing pretty well. As everyone points out, the stock-based compensation, the premium to what they paid to what some of those companies might have been worth at the time. I mean, some of those mistakes perhaps in the transactions, it didn't seem like there was such a big deal during the bull market and the growth phase that there a couple of years ago that we were in. Now it's coming back to bite them. Again, usage-based model in the middle of constricting economy. This is really a challenging macro situation to be in. And then the last thing that I wanted to say is
on those, Simon, just your view of those acquisitions, because Twilio today is a very different company that Jeff founded in 2008, 2009. And I do wonder if they kind of got outside of their lane a little bit with, getting away from the core messaging. And if you look, I'm not super familiar with the acquisitions and how they kind of change the capabilities they're trying to offer their customer, but it seems like they're trying to put themselves more at the center of the kind of customer relationship. Is that just not their core competency? Or even, perhaps worse, is that something it's kind of not possible for them to do as essentially the message broker?
The core based upon messaging about an SMS was fantastic, revolutionary at the time. Everybody was using it. That's why Twilio became the stock that you saw the stock return that it did in years past. And again, it was very cheap, very good ROI. It was just something that's just like customer facing, right? Twilio's very mission is to be the ultimate customer engagement platform of the world. And one of the terms we throw around with our own advisors here at Seven Investing is, are they empire building? Are they so committed to this bigger picture vision that it doesn't matter if you're going out and paying 14 times sales to acquire SendGrid? You want to get into email. And then you want through Segment to have a more comprehensive view of your customer. And you want to get into video. It's like at some point, yes, land and expand, you see the upside for things like that. But when the economy turns the other way, you're sometimes stuck holding the bag on a bloated organization that's not getting the bang for its buck. I think that's where Twilio stands today. And Jeff Lawson, just one more comment before I want to open it back up, and everyone, feel free to jump in on this too, but Twilio has 4 priorities that Jeff Lawson has addressed for how he wants to turn this ship around right now. What is the plan? We mentioned earlier they're laying off about 10% of their global workforce, about 8,000 people, about 10,000 people have already been laid off. They've got some restructuring costs associated with that made their way into earnings. But 4 priorities that Lawson laid out: investing in platform reliability and trust. I'd say for the most part, they've got that. That's an iterative improvement. Increasing the profitability of messaging. We saw messaging increase 5% price increase. They didn't lose any customers on that. 122% still DBNRR. So you can still increase that iteratively if you want to get a better margin profile on your core platform. Accelerating segment adoption. This is something that would compete against a CRM platform like a Salesforce, where you want to have a comprehensive view of like, okay, we did this campaign, not just this many people opened the campaign, but we got this much revenue from it. This is who they are. This is where they're buying from. All of those things, knocking down those data silos, if you will. And then scaling the flex customer base. This is for contact centers, customer service. They've just signed 2 very large deals with insurance companies, property and casualty insurers, that have agents that want to have context and follow up with claims and things like that. If they can scale that to truly massive organizations, there could be a huge improvement to the profit margin profile. So I'll throw it back to you guys. I do see a turnaround plan is in place. I think the execution of this is going to be very hard during the constricting economy that we're in for the next year or 2, maybe longer than that, who knows? But at least Lawson is recognizing, hey, mea culpa, we have some mistakes we made in the past. Let's go ahead and at least try to fix some of them.
So I just want to provide some context. So the acquisitions that they made, SendGrid was the email acquisition, which fits into communications, overall into communications. It's recognized inside communications. Now, see, here's the thing. The thing is that their core platform has actually been growing so quickly that email's contribution to the communications platform is only 10%. So the reason they acquired it, so when they acquired it too, it was only growing at 30%. So it was actually a slower growing business relative to the core communications platform business, which has been growing circa 50%, per annum. So they've got the core business is actually super strong. They acquired this because it's higher margin, and it sort of fits in with this, this higher level view of having just greater visibility, providing the multiple different tools for communication, whether it's email, messaging, customer data, seeing how campaigns work and things like that, right? So they acquired it for that. But I think, you could, as to Simon's point, say that, they paid 3.2 billion or something like that, or 2 billion for, I think, SendGrid. Was it worth it? But again, they paid using high price stocks. In my mind, it's neither here nor there. And it sort of fits in. I think that it fits in with the larger goal of the platform, what they want to turn it into. I think the issue is I keep coming back to is that they've got all these different pieces that are actually not contributing a lot of revenue, that they want to turn into, they want to take the 5 pieces and turn it into so that 2 plus 2 is not 4, but 5. They want to turn it into a bigger piece. That's just not working for them. I think that's where their problem is. So they keep throwing salespeople and this and that at it. And I think that's where the problem is. The other thing I think they've not realized probably, and they should have realized this, is selling the comms is different from selling software. They have different buying centers, right? So your software business is not growing as quickly when you would expect it to grow quickly, because you have a very strong comms business and you're a comms platform. You have people who know how to sell comms, not software. I think that's so we see that with the distribution. So the disclosures actually the Analyst Day are really eye-opening in my mind. I mean, they've got messaging which has got lower margin, mixed margin. They've got email which is higher margin but low growth. Then if you look at, but they've been able to pass on costs. And if you look at software, largely their software revenue is segment, right? So 60% of their software revenue is basically segment acquisition. And Flex, which is organic really, is about 20%, but it's already at $100 million run rate. So I think they're a victim of circumstances. If their share price was not cut as much as it has been cut, and people did not think it's dying, which I don't think it is. If you look at, it's another way to think about an enterprise sales company is to look at how many $10 million, $1 million. So a lot of the other companies that we talk about that have also seen their value cut, I would question though, they actually do not have $10 million deals at this volume. Right. So this company, for example, between 2020 and 2022 has seen its $10 million deals go from 7 to 27. That's pretty significant for a company of $8 billion market cap. Same thing, if you look at $5 million plus deals, it's gone from 17 to 65. That's pretty significant. Again, many of those companies whose valuations haven't been cut as much maybe as Twilio's has, or maybe Twilio's valuation had gone too far ahead, don't have those customers, right? So I think the penetration that they've got in the Global 2000, the size of deals that they are doing, I think they've got the basic pieces, but I think it's the turmoil at that COO level. So basically, George, who used to be COO, then when he left, I think that's where the problem started, and maybe I should have picked up on that. He was an excellent COO. He left, and Mark Borodowski, who's now actually president of revenue at Cloudflare, he became chief of revenue or something. He was, I think, one of the lieutenants under George, who he didn't last very long in that position. And then they've got now Elena Donio, who has come in as president. She was a board member. So I think that churn at that level. So, I mean, and as a CEO, my job would be to set the vision, right? And set, okay, this is what we want to do. We've got all these great pieces. Now go make it work. Some of the things is just going and getting the sales, making the sales happen, right? You might have a great product, but you have to also need a great sales organization. I think that's where the failure is. The failure is at the sales organization level. Failure is at the integration of the salespeople. Failure is at the trying to figure out, those people who are selling segment, making them sell comms is hard. Same thing, those people who are selling, email, can they sell segment, right? But still, the fact that they've got Flex at $100 million run rate in about 4 years is pretty significant. So they've got, it's a question of scaling the right people and descaling or the wrong people, I guess, is the question in my mind.
So I think they're facing into that to some extent. So in the narrative where they brought to life, where they get those 11% headcount reductions, I think primarily that was in the sales organization. And they've done a lot of restructuring to focus people around, core competencies and the core products. They've also made some changes in kind of R&D to streamline the organization and kind of offshoring some of their G&A type roles. So I guess they are starting to focus on that, but not to sort of harp on about it. I think they're probably not doing enough. And the fact that, it sounds like they've made the cuts now, the 11% is behind them. Now they're slowing growth. Well, that's a very far cry from some of the actions that, say, Musk and Zuckerberg are taking right now to, in some ways, address similar kind of cost challenges in their businesses.
Yeah.
I think there's some good points. Go ahead,
just want to quickly add one point. So one of the changes that they've made now is gone from what they said that they have now functional leadership. So what I read that as, instead of having product leadership, you have, okay, I'm going to take software sales, I'm going to take comms sales, or I'm going to lead the software side, I'm going to lead the comms side, and that allows for more collaboration. It's a very Apple-like organization, which is functional leadership versus product leadership. And that removes the friction of, my product versus your product. It's our product. So maybe that will make a difference. But yeah, I think another way to think about this is that I think we overrate what a CEO does. A good CEO combination is very difficult. I think that the loss of having a good COO is actually what's biting them, right? And as you said, the current COO is basically the CFO. So it shows up in the shareholders' letters too, because the shareholder letters, the CEO comments, president of revenue comments, then the CEO comments, which really the CEO is not the CEO is CFO in a way. So I think those are the organizational changes that they've got.
And I'll comment on that one too, as someone who did a decade in enterprise sales, that it's very challenging for restructuring a sales organization. It sounds so easy. Oh, you just sold enterprise, now you need to sell developers, or you sold from developers, now you start selling. It's really a lot harder than it sounds on paper for investors. We've seen this time and time again with companies try to figure out how to change this, and it doesn't really work very, very well. We saw Splunk. Splunk was another usage-based platform. They were indexing unstructured data. They said, hey, Splunk has got a really cool platform that developers love. Let's just go out there and start selling this to the enterprise, at the enterprise level. And they put tons of money into this. They put tons of money into their sales force, never quite captured it, at least at what they were expected to. On the opposite side, and everyone, we've talked a lot about Okta, recently, right? Okta was selling at the enterprise level, capturing really fat, 25% margins, cash flow margins from the enterprise. And then they tried to go out and sell developers through the Auth0 acquisition. It's very, very difficult, kind of an awkward transition. Countless others, right? Alteryx, others. This is a common problem, especially with cloud computing, that it's challenging to try to, one, train your sales reps how to sell to a different client base, and then two, try to convince your customers to buy what you want them to buy in this land and expand empire building. It's a great point too that I think Todd makes in our chat here. He says that one of the problems is that they have not expanded on their acquisitions. They've not integrated or bundled their capabilities to create more verticalized solutions, which many of their competitors have. I would just add to that, great point, Todd. Salesforce is the master of building out verticals and making acquisitions to attract those, and then really, really, hammering home the ROI of what they're selling. I haven't seen, at least not yet. Twilio has grown its divisions pretty well, but I don't think the acquisitions, they've really gone to the same pains of quantifying that. And then he also went on to say that they're not an enterprise sales company. I think that's a good point too. I want to get into the scoring, just to kind of keep this moving along, knowing that we're up on about 45 minutes in here. Also, some other great points from Sandeep saying, Uber migrated away from Twilio and now seems to use an in-house solution. Yes, that's always an option that you can build versus buy if you have this. Luke, or did either of you want to talk about that? Maybe other customers doing something similar to what Uber did, because I know that Uber was a really big percentage of Twilio's revenue for quite some time there.
That's worries right. about I'd forgotten, actually. I'd forgotten that they'd lost that customer. Bad example earlier. But, I think my point stands, though, that the customers they do have, not every customer's got the deep pockets of an Uber and can afford to build this stuff at scale profitably. If you're going directly to the networks and to email providers, probably not going to get the same deal that a Twilio would get on your behalf. So quite hard for the customers to unplug from them. But maybe I'll throw in a point that's it's actually been in the back of my mind since I became a Twilio shareholder, but it becomes a bit more pronounced now. And I know they're making moves into video, but essentially, messaging and voice are the core of their capability, and it's where they get the majority of their revenues from. And maybe if we just sort of think strategically on where the world is going over the next 5 years, 10 years, like the rise, I feel like Twilio are getting squeezed, or they will get squeezed at some point. The big shift is the rise of intelligent digital assistants, and like a large majority of the use cases for a company like Twilio are kind of contact center type stuff, business to customer, trying to deal with a complaint or a sale or something. And like we're almost at the stage that intelligent assistants can kind of cover like the large majority of those interactions, and maybe there's like a small percentage get kind of handed off or escalated to a real human. Well, you probably don't need anywhere near as many voice interactions or text message or messaging interactions if there's someone on a chatbot. I know chatbots can be incredibly frustrating today, but they're getting better. So that's kind of one strategic force I think is going to start squeezing them at one end. Then the other end, I know they're getting into video, but the large majority of their sort of revenues is voice and messaging. Where a company has like a high value customer engagement, we're seeing with many of the banks now, they're moving to video engagement because you can look someone in the eye, do your KYC, show me your passport, and you can have a much richer conversation, or like a wealth management conversation with someone who works at your bank or applying for a mortgage or something. So I think businesses where it makes sense to do so, because it's obviously very expensive, ties up their own people, they're moving in that direction. So again, they're moving kind of away from just kind of voice, talking to some, impersonal somebody at the end of a phone line. So I do wonder if these two forces are over time going to kind of start to exercise some compression on at least a slow growth, if not kind of start to reverse growth.
Great points. One other question I wanted to ask before I'm going to ask each of you to give me a 1 to 10 quantitative number on how likely you are to invest in Twilio today. But there was another question I thought was a really good one from Giants here. He or she is asking, what metrics should we watch to determine if they are making progress? Again, Twilio has laid out their turnaround plan. Jeff Lawson has saying, we are going to make some fixes. I think in correlation to those, I think two things we should certainly be watching is the core platform. We should be watching for price increases. and improved gross margin in the communications platform that they have. Messaging is going to be a little bit more expensive because there's more than enough wiggle room there. And then the one thing we haven't really talked about yet is one of the metrics that I think is very important, if not a hard metric, at least announcements of how well Twilio Engage is going to be doing. This is the product they've been working on for the last 2 years of basically saying, if we want to sell to the enterprise, we want to package all these acquisitions together and then kind of have an automated way for their marketers to do their job. Twilio Engage is going to be that. It's going to include, all the SendGrid stuff, all of the things that they had in the core platform, certainly all of the acquisitions that they had before, tied together through that segment customer data platform that, gives context of who you're sending the campaigns to. If Engage catches on and they can get this all-in-one, full buffet, whole enchilada, whatever analogy you want to use for it, then that's a really good thing. That means they actually are going to start selling to the enterprise and fixing a lot of the things they need to fix. If not, this might be a lot harder of a problem to solve than they anticipate, and we might see further cost-cutting in the future. Luke or Nirban, any thoughts on the metrics or any things that you're watching kind of going forward here?
Yeah, so I want to correct a few things. So, for example, I would say that, so I think it's wrong to say this company, or at least in my opinion, wrong to say this company does not sell to enterprise. It does. Those $10 million deals, the $5 million deals are, $1 million deals are enterprise deals, right? It's just that it's selling mostly, I think, comms to those people, but it is still an enterprise level deal. I think it's just the buying center is different. Is the thing that we need to remember, is that the buying center for comms versus buying center for software. I think that's where the big challenge is for Engage, right? So Engage has to find a different buying center, right? So that sales force is it's not just about the product. The sales force for that is actually going to be markedly different. So these, in terms of progress, the number one thing I would watch is how their OpEx is growing or slowing. So I would like to see them generate more operating leverage. At a $2 billion gross profit run rate, even if you're growing 20%, 25%, if you can't generate operating leverage, there is some problem somewhere in your organization that you need to really address. That'll be number one in my mind is, I want to see steady operating leverage. I want to see the gross profit grow at a steady rate, because everything else is going to be shrouded in, what margins, where, this, that. So let's look at the gross profit and say, well, can the gross profit at least grow around, actually get back to the 30% level? If the gross profit is growing at 30% level, that'll actually be pretty good. It looks like it's trending actually to the to low teens or mid teens next quarter. But I think that can again pretty quickly turn it around because of the usage based model. So in my mind, it's really at a high level OpEx and the back to growth for the gross profit level. Those are two things that would matter the most. And of course, at look at the DBNR. The DBNR can be a bit misleading, right? Because if your DBNR is 120%, then and your growth is 30%, then you only get 10% growth from everything else, right? It's because I think there's quite a bit of churn that gets, you're hiding the churn because the DBNR is looking at the customers that you have maintained across the 2 periods. So it doesn't include the churn. It's not a net retention rate in that sense. But I think if we look at gross profit growth and the OpEx and the operating leverage, I think those would be the things that we watch. Finally, I would like to see them do something with their cash, which is not an acquisition.
Yeah. I support everything Annabelle said. I'd love to see them just be a bit more clean and tidy with the kind of gaps and non-gap reporting. Like if you look at their gap numbers, they're pretty horrible. Like gap loss from operations has increased pretty consistently quarter after quarter. I'd like to see them starting to turn that round. And I think Chandler, I don't think he committed, but he responded to an analyst on the call this week to say they would start guiding for gross profit. So that'll be helpful. At least we can see if the sort of stall they're setting out in terms of some of the metrics Annabelle described and whether they're starting to deliver on those forecasts.
One last thing that I wanted to introduce was that Twilio is pretty cheap right now by at least most of the metrics we look at. This is a company that's doing about $4 billion or at least at the annual run rate right now, $4 billion in sales, has an $8 billion market cap. And when you exclude, or you consider the debt and then exclude the cash, like Anirban was mentioning, it's really only an enterprise value about $5.5 billion. The combination of Lawson and his other co-founders together have got super voting Class B shares, but even considering those, are still have less than 30% of the voting power of Twilio. There is certainly influence from the board that is unhappy about these bloated operating costs they've been incurring. Do you think that Twilio, I think you mentioned it earlier, Anirban, but do you think that Twilio is on the table of either an outright acquisition or at least an activist investor coming in and shaking some things up from a management perspective?
Yeah, like, I mean, as I said, you know, a 30% premium and Salesforce buys this and then uses its super streamlined Salesforce to actually, you know, do what Jeff Lawson hasn't been able to do. You know, and for Salesforce, it might mean bringing in a product leader like Jeff Lawson, who comes from the Salesforce stable, actually, right? And, you know, having, you know, it helps with their succession planning and things like that. Actually might make, and given that you get $4 billion of cash or $3 billion when you exclude the debt, you know, $10 billion, $12 billion acquisition actually is pretty smart. You pay $12 billion and you're actually only paying an enterprise value of like $8 billion. And it would actually nicely fit for sales. I think that's very much possible. The one thing I did look at the short interest. Actually, the short interest is not that high for a company that has catered completely. Short interest is less than 5%. So that sometimes gives me pause and saying some other people can come and short this and actually, you know, drive the price. I do think if the price goes further down, the more it goes down, the more it becomes interesting for an activist player or a PE, for example. A PE people can come in, strip the company out, sell bits and pieces to different people, and maybe there's more value to be had by, you know, by instead the sum of parts probably does not equal the market cap today. So you can sell everything in pieces and you get more value out of it. So I think, as we have talked about this before, I think the board must be, if the board is doing its job, should be pressuring Lawson to actually behave himself. Now's the time to behave and show what you can do, you know, as Luke was saying, in terms of execution. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Great points there. That addressed, I think, one of the questions from Shri about, is there still a downside risk potential for the company like this? Yes, certainly. Our company that's only 5% short interest has got plenty of downside potential even from now, if not counteracted by the fact that it is pretty cheap, at least compared to its traditional valuation multiple metrics. He was asking, is the call recorded? Yes, we are recording this. We're going to publish it as a podcast or also to our YouTube channel, which we put earlier in the chat there if you'd like to follow up on any part of this. Luke, let me start with you. You are the Twilio shareholder for several years. I'm sorry that the shares are down more than 80% here in 2022. Where are you 1 to 10 on Twilio today as an investor?
Simon, you know, it's not the worst performer in my portfolio by some margin, so don't worry.
It's been an interesting year for several.
Like, I'm going to borrow a term from our colleague Matt Cochran's excellent podcast, and Airbnb's too, like the record rebound. Like, I certainly think Twilio is a rebound, not a wreck. But if I think about so I'm going to give you two scores. I'm going to cheat a little bit. Okay. So if I were not a shareholder and I was being entirely impartial, I think they would get like maybe a 3.5 or a 4 from me. But I am a shareholder, and I'm very, very strongly considering no longer being a shareholder. And the reason is, I do actually think we're probably near to a floor. I hadn't considered the sort of short potential. I think we're probably near to a, you know, can it get much cheaper? It's almost on like an EV to sales of 1.2, something like that. Can't get much cheaper, I don't think. Caveat, you know, not do your own due diligence. So where am I going with this? Sorry, let me bring it back again. I think there are better places for my investing dollars today. So the small allocation I have in Twilio today, I think probably has a higher chance of rebounding faster or more reliably in some of my other beaten down companies in my portfolio. So my personal score is a 2, I'm afraid.
A 2. That's on the glass half empty side of the spectrum there on Airbon. 1 to 10. Where do you fall on Twilio?
Well, I used to have a large shareholding in Twilio, and now it's a really small shareholding in Twilio. That, despite many of my other stocks are also down a lot. At one point, my Twilio holding was probably about 7% or 6% of my portfolio. That was when the stock was $400 or something like that. So that aside, yeah. So I've thought about a couple of things. I have a hard time selling this right now, largely because it's got a great founder leader, it's got great tech, and the sum of parts seems more than the value that they have been assigned. And the $4 billion of cash, I think, is a significant. This is a company that's not running out of cash. It's, in other words, there's a significant floor just there. And, as you said, it's like selling at one-time sales. Adjust for the lower gross margins, as let's call it 2 times sales. A little bit of turnaround, a little bit of macro change wouldn't require it a lot to go from like it's 1 time sales multiple to a 6 times sales multiple, right? That would be a 6 mega, right? And it's not, usually I would bet. So the other thing I would say is that, there have been many companies like this, like, Netflix, for example, has seen 90% drawdowns previously and then went on to become 50 baggers from there, right? So, and those tend to happen, but not often, but they tend to only happen with companies that are run by great leaders, founders who, have a vision and, want to run and can manage through difficult, is Jeff Lawson a Reed Hastings? I don't know. But seems to be that there's potential. It's just valuation is too cheap. Is there more downside? Potentially, yes. But the way I see this is there is a probability of it going down by another 50%, but there is a probability of it going up 10x. Just a normalization of valuation and a little bit better execution, a little bit favorable macro, and on that scale, if you just think probabilistically, it seems that, if because I hold the shares, it seems favorable to me to hold. Even if if a 10x is a 5x is, probably I would not get the return I was thinking I would get out of this, but it would be significantly market beating from here. So I would continue holding it. The only thing I've thought about is, if I want to be cheeky and play this, sell my shares, replace them by a call option dated 2025. That gives you leveraged upside, and
that's an asterisk to your score in your bond. That's an asterisk to whatever the number. You got a call options for 2025.
Yeah, you get a call option.
Got it.
Yeah, I did think about buying actually some call options. Then I didn't, thinking that, well, a lot of my money has already been in fire. It's all burning. Buying more call options might just mean that if the market doesn't turn by 2025, it just burns even more. But I think the valuation. So I'd give it a 5. If I wasn't a shareholder, I wouldn't be rushing to buy. I would rather wait for one more earnings call or for some action from their side that suggests that they are making the right moves. If they make the right move and the market sees that the stock is going to at that time bounce pretty significantly and pretty hard, but that might be the better time to buy, because you might lose a 40%, 50% rise. That might happen on the back of good news, but that might also indicate that the management is up to a task. I would be really surprised if I said the board would be derelict in its duties to the shareholders if it did not make Jeff Lawson do the right thing. That would be just it. The board would get sued. There is just no doubt. The board is probably going to get sued anyways because the stock is down 90%. But they would be derelict in their duty if they did not stop him from making another acquisition and did not make him cut costs and did not make him ride the ship, right? So I think that's something to keep in mind.
And I think that's a good point. I'm going to get to my own score here too. We've seen all over the map in the chat here. We've seen 5s and 6s, and we've seen a 2. For me personally, I'm going to give 2 scores too. I'm going to do what Luke did. I'm going to break their own rules, and I'm going to say that within the next 1 year, if we were a trader on this, if we were a short-term trader on Twilio right now, I'm at a 2. because I think anything can happen. I think the economy is going through a tough time. I don't think that the usage-based model is going to be conducive to this, and it's got way too much overhead. All the reasons we talked about. I'm pretty bearish short term. But then I also look at this and I say, you've got a company that it is 2 times sales from the market cap, less than 1.5 times sales on the enterprise value. You've got a very good leader that I think gets 6 months. I think he gets 6 months of patience to get his action plan to actually work. We get 2 quarterly results, and then if we don't, I almost am certain, you've got the insiders holding less than 30% voting control, even with the super voting shares. And I think that's just an invitation, cash-rich company, embedded with customers, ROI-driven. This is just the recipe for an activist to get involved, if not a PE firm to start, saying we're going to buy the company outright. And I think that with it being priced so low and all the other things that we mentioned, I think that over a 3-year period, I'm probably closer to a 7. That's a lot higher than anyone said on this call. But if you look at the long term and just where it's priced and the pieces, I'm pretty bullish for a longer term investment in Twilio from today's price. I don't carry the baggage, like you guys said, of the grumble I've been holding through the downturn this year. But it's all good context and great points. Oh, we've even got one. We even got a 1, I think. That was 1 out of 10. So we have some other comments in the chat here. But this has been a lot of fun. Any final thoughts? Luke, let me start with you, and then I'll go to Anirban. But final thoughts on Twilio as we're wrapping up here the call today.
I feel disappointed that the company didn't sort of live out the expectations I had for it. I'm kind of kicking myself, though. I feel like I kind of was an investor asleep at the wheel a little bit on this one. I've learned quite a lot, actually, from just reviewing Twilio in the last few days and then realizing I need to really be on top of it with everything in my portfolio.
Fantastic. Anirban?
Well, Luke is just making me feel bad by saying that he was asleep at wheel. Well, I was reviewing the quarters and I still didn't get it. So, so every time this happens to me, I think, my lesson really is that, I think if you invest in this type of environment, high growth, and it's very easy to say, I should have sold when it was $400 or $300 or something. But at that time, it seemed like it's going to go to 600, right? And the problem is that when things are going up, they keep going up, and you never know, really. It's very hard. My only lesson, and this is a broader lesson, and I'll try to do a better job of this, and I didn't do this personally. This is more of a portfolio allocation thing. I would actually not have anything to do with whether or not I hold Twilio. I would continue holding Twilio. One of the things that I think makes absolute sense is when the market is really bullish and it's really on the crescendo is on and the music is going towards the finale and John Williams is just, making the London Philharmonic Orchestra sound awesome. At that time, just need to dial back and, move some of your portfolio to cash. So trimming on the way up it's just, I think there's a portfolio management decision that I think just could make things better. That's my takeaway from a lot of my companies that have seen significant pullback is sometimes just blindly holding, and for myself, where most of my investments are inside a tax account, for example, I've always thought, well, selling basically means paying the tax man, but maybe paying the tax man and keeping some of the cash aside is probably the right thing to do. But that all said, it's also very easy to have the cash and deploy it much ahead of bottoms because nobody knows where the bottoms are, nobody knows where the tops are. So in a little bit better position size management and things like that is what I'd say. I don't have a regret actually holding this company. I don't think I'm going to sell it. I might actually go and buy the call so that I can burn more of my money, incinerate, put it in the bonfire. But I do think that, I might buy actually some 2025 calls. That gives them enough time to turn it around. That's my...
We'll draw a contract between us, Anirban. I'll commit to selling you my shares in 2025 and we'll split the difference.
No,
remind me in 3 years.
Yeah. I'm buying a call, which gives me the right to buy somebody else's shares. So yes.
Well, to recap those numbers, Luke was between a 2 and a 4 on his investing score of Twilio. Anirban was a 5 with the asterisk that he might be buying 2025 calls. I am a short-term 2, long-term 7 on Twilio. Such a fascinating company, such a battlefield stock right now, mixed opinions all across the board. We hope that this was helpful and useful and valuable for tuning in as we did kind of this deep dive into Twilio. Also a reminder that I think one of the best selling points of 7 Investing, of our service, is the powwow. is of things like this. We have a team of 7 really, really bright advisors, and we do this exact same exercise like we did with Twilio on this live stream every single month for every single one of our recommendations, actually. It's not just issuing a report and disappearing, but you actually have to put on your battle armor when you are pitching to this team and do your homework and do your research, knowing that we are going to ask very difficult questions on each one of our pitches. I think that makes all of us better investors, and it's truly valuable to do that level of diligence on every recommendation we make. And we certainly had some good recommendations for you here in November. Luke put a brand new one on the scorecard, and Nirban put a re-recommendation onto the scorecard. And I pulled an innovative company that was brand new onto there as well. So check us out at 7investing.com/subscribe if you would like to see all of our 7 stock recommendations each and every month. If nothing else, go and get signed up for our new $1 trial. You can get the first 7 days for just $1, so you can see everything that we have to offer and then make a decision on whether you like our platform and want to stick around. But that's it for checking in on Twilio. My thanks to Luke Hallard. My thanks to Nirban Mahanti. My thanks to all of our other 7 investing advisors who also contributed behind the scenes for this discussion. We appreciate you tuning in. We will be posting this to our YouTube, which I have posted the link to, and also our podcast next week. We are here to empower you to invest in your future. We are 7 Investing. Have a great day.